Originally, paintings were an integral part of the building for which they were designed. Sometimes, when you go into a Renaissance church or chapel, you have the feeling that the images on the wall are records of the building's interior life. Together, they make up the building's memory. So much are they part of the life and individuality of the building. Everything around the image is part of its meaning. Its uniqueness is part of the uniqueness of the single place where it is. Everything around it confirms and consolidates its meaning.
The man that you have just heard was a philosopher named John Berger. He was narrating a documentary titled Ways of Seeing, which is available on YouTube for anyone interested. One key moment that struck out to me was when, upon looking at a cathedral, Berger made a claim that the paintings within the cathedral and the cathedral itself belong together to express a higher meaning. This is to say, the sum of the parts is greater than each part on its own. It is the painting that gives the cathedral its life and meaning, and the same could be said for the other way around. And what Berger is essentially trying to say is that by separating the two, both of them are stripped of their meaning. By being able to replicate a work of art outside of its original context, the work of art loses something precious. This is because to him, the background framework added on to the work of art itself, and together and only together did they amount to something higher. In other words, context matters, and we live in an age of art without context. Today, anyone can replicate a work of art anywhere and at any time. The ancient monuments that took months, if not years to complete, can now be downloaded digitally from the internet almost instantly. Great paintings of the past, which have once stood to represent the most divine elements that mankind revered, can now be turned into wallpaper on our phones. Therefore, a separation of art is now commonplace. Works of art are now isolated and without a home. But the point that must be made clear is that it is we who suffer the consequence of this. Because at the end of the day, whatever meaning is lost through the replication and isolation of art, it is ultimately only us who can feel the loss. The painting itself, after all, lacks the self-awareness to feel lost or without context, but we do. It is we who have put paintings on empty billboards and sculptures in miniature forms on our keychains. Therefore, though explicitly Berger has stated that much of the sacred principles that transcended the painting itself is beginning to fade, such as the values and ideals that are represented through the work of art, I would like to think that the more interesting victim in this process is ourselves. And to those who do not see the significance of this, to those who hold on to the idea that stripping art from its context is not a big deal, do not know the important role that art played in our history as a species. Displaying works of art in a void without context does much harm to us because of the integral nature that art has in the human condition. Art to humans was probably just as, if not more, important than language. In many ways, it was a form of language before language properly existed. Ever since man first chiseled on the cave, art has always been by our side, helping us illustrate both our most fundamental needs, such as food and water, as well as our most highest ideals, such as acts of courage on the battlefield or our relationship with the gods. And it was through art forms such as plays or poems that both of them have been immortalized. I invoke the analogy to language because, for those that still deny the importance of placing art within its proper context, they should at the very least see the importance of language. How else but through disgusted grunts can they express the disagreements with my argument if not for language? And the hope is that the reader will see that the critical role that language has played in our lives runs parallel with art. Anyone can understand that language without its proper context, such as words isolated from their sentences, will be unintelligible. We will not be able to understand each other, and we will not be able to understand ourselves. Understand neither, and we will not be able to understand humanity's place in the world. Instruments appear better sonically amongst the orchestra. Words appear better sensibly among the sentences it belongs to, and art appears better aesthetically amongst the context it belongs to, be it in the walls of a palace or the ceiling of a temple. Just like language, it is through art that we were able to make sense of the world, and perhaps make sense of any world beyond our own. Real heroes became legends for the common man to follow. Stars became constellations for the navigators to travel, and the Egyptian aristocracy became mummies to make their way into the afterlife. All of these examples were possible through art, for it is art that allows man's ideals to be expressed in a comprehensible manner through paintings, sculpture, and even architecture. And they guide us through life, for art is quite literally a second compass to guide us, or it is at the very least something that, again, like language, can be used to express who we are. This goes to show just how important of a role that art plays in our lives. Through art, mankind have been able to conceptualize their place in the world. Just as we understand more when we can articulate our conceptions of the world into words, so too can we understand more of who we are through art. Speaking of ourselves, let us focus on the state of man, or more precisely, man's spirit. Of course, such a term is hard to measure. In fact, it's even hard to define at all. Though the word spirit can have many meanings, here it speaks to a man's vitality, vigorousness, and the general gusto that one possesses when healthy and of sound mind. Again, though it is hard to measure, just as the artist can be measured by the art he produces, so too can man's spirit be measured by looking at the art found in the zeitgeist. For as we have established, art is a means of channeling the very spirit in its many forms, be it the spirit of the divine, of the heroes, of the explorers, and of much more that we deem highly. With this being said, let us observe the last few decades. At least in the West, upon looking back in recent history, we will see that art no longer reflects man's spirit, or, at the very least, whatever spirit it does reflect is an unhealthy one. Only these two answers are possible in an age when art no longer is used to express our highest virtues of excellence and will to power. When the artist today throws a pile of bricks on the wall or hangs a chair from the ceiling and calls it art, they are either ignoring man's high spirit or revealing just how low it has gotten. This is not to say that art today is bad, which personally I do think it is, and saying that it either does not reflect man's high spirit or reveals its absence is not a moral statement. Though I do in fact think that art is terrible in this day and age, I must keep in mind that this is still a subjective opinion. The point of man's lack of spirit, however, is more objective. So understandably, this is what I will focus on. When the songs of today are produced almost mechanically through algorithms as if it was artificially manufactured in a factory, when the paintings can be replicated instantly to the point where it is divorced from its original context and by extension its meaning, and of course with the exception of the once again factory-produced Marvel movies and the lazy cash-grabbing reboots of Star Wars, when no art has captured the decade enough for the people to consider it a decade-defining art, not even to the degree that grunge captured the 90s, then it doesn't really feel safe to say that man's spirit is truly absent in the realm of art and thus, by extension, life as we know it. In a very real sense, the 90s really was the last generation. Up until this point, each decade had its own defining moments, and each decade was thus distinct. Today, much like the bastardized art that I have spoken of, we live in an ahistorical age, without context and without meaning. We have no defining icons except for maybe the Kardashians in the 2000s and a handful of TikTokers in the 2010s. In the past, we had some sort of art grounded in the times that we lived in. Grunge in the 90s, disco in the 70s. No matter how good or bad these art forms may have been, it at the very least gave us not only a sense of identity, but a sense of belonging. Through it, we are able to know who we are and where we are. However, today, man is now left incomplete, imperfect, but somehow no longer evolving. The chips have not only fallen, but they continue to fall, and they fall further still. Art fails to guide us to higher ideals as it once did, perhaps because it was we who have failed art. One solution, therefore, is to have art fuse with the general landscape of the architecture and the wide walls of the cathedrals that it was once born in. By putting art into a context, any context, just as the words can be put into any sentence, a meaning can be comprehended. In this world of lifeless corporate white-collar workers, we need artists now more than ever. A generation of failed artists can only produce a generation of lost souls stuck in a spiritual purgatory. I firmly believe that it is art that can in fact speak 1,000 words, but not just any words. It is art that can speak the unspoken words to not only get us through life, but guide us all the way, if not beyond. What is needed now more than ever is art that speaks to something transcendent and eternal. Art is the last cure to awaken the high spirit of man, the man that sought glory and virtue. It was also perhaps the first cure known to us. It is a cure for our general sense of loss and indirection. For it is incorrect to say that we are on the wrong path. The truth is, we are not on any path at all. The direct consequence of taking art from its context was that we have taken ourselves out of our own. We are now no longer aware of the fundamental needs of belonging because, just like the art that we see, we have become ahistorical across space and time. It was art that have always reminded us of who we are, and we have forgotten that because we have uprooted the paintings from the cathedral and into our phones. Indeed, we have very much uprooted ourselves. The art that is needed is something that speaks beyond itself, something to show us the way and to remind us that each era in the history of art was man-made and that art very much made man. They say the times are changing, but I say the times are waiting.